Hello everyone, this week we will be covering comprehensive assessments and spiritual histories. So first we'll be talking about client interest. So client interest is the reason for giving a brief assessment to gauge the individual's interest in the topic of spirituality. It is important to gain the individual's consent to proceed with giving a comprehensive assessment regarding if the spirituality might be a good resource in dealing with presenting problems. In the informed consent, there are multiple aspects of therapy discussed, one of which informs the individual that they will be invited to share information to the therapist to better understand the challenges that the individual is facing. It is also explained that a part of the broader assessment is to include an assessment of spirituality and religion to gauge whether the individual finds these topics important to them or not, and if they would benefit from spiritual or religious interventions. It is important that the therapist monitor the individual's responses to ensure the individual is still comfortable with discussing the intersectionality between spirituality and service delivery. Coercion must be absent for an individual to freely incorporate their spirituality. Client spiritual salience. Client spiritual salience is the amount of enthusiasm an individual has about their faith. For example, one may affirm their practice of mainstream religious traditions, but show little to no interest about their faith. Individuals may engage in spiritual activities due to cultural or social reasons, but are not particularly committed to religion or practice. Therefore, a comprehensive spiritual assessment may not be appropriate for the therapist to use for the sake of time. In the opposite respect, it is important to also gauge how important spirituality is to the individual and how it will impact the therapeutic relationship. Spiritual salience also affects the individual's autonomy. For example, the more vital spirituality is to the individual, the more important that it may be to them to have spirituality integrated into their service provisions. Spiritual competence is a form of cultural competence that covers spirituality and religion, and more specifically, the individual's spiritual worldview. It's important that the therapist is aware of their own value, informed worldview, along with the assumptions, biases, and limitations that come with this worldview. It is also important that the therapist is empathetic and strengths-based when approaching the client's worldview. Lastly, for a therapist to be spiritually competent, they have to have the ability to design, implement interventions, and resonate with the individual's served spiritual worldview. So part of the informed consent is informing the individual served about the extent to what they will be going through in therapy. So this is a sample script that I came up with the help of Hodge 2015. The therapy orientation that I utilize in my practice is strengths-based. I seek to build on the assets and resources individuals have that can assist them with dealing with challenges they face. In the beginning of our therapeutic relationship, I will invite you to share information to help me understand the challenges you are currently facing, as well as some of your strengths and assets. During this process, I may inquire about several aspects of your life, such as family, work, relationships, employment, and health. To continue this assessment, I may include an assessment of spirituality and religion to better understand if spirituality and religion is something that is important to you and if they could assist you in dealing with the problems you are facing. Spirituality can be related to presenting issues of client systems in 4 possible ways. 1. Related to the solution but not to the problem. For example, in hospitals and other healthcare settings, addressing spiritual needs can help with individuals cope with the challenges, illnesses, loss, and isolation the individual could be facing. However, depending on the complexity of the need, a comprehensive spiritual assessment may not be necessary. Unrelated to the solution, so 2, unrelated to the solution but related to the problem. For example, spirituality can be exclusively related to the problem individuals face. In certain settings, an individual may be bullied or restricted access due to their beliefs or value system. 3. Related both to problem and solution. An example of this would be to evaluate an individual's beliefs and practices to determine if the individual beliefs and practices are manifestation of the mental illness or are conventional expressions of faith. 4, unrelated to both the solution and the problem. So it doesn't impact either the solution and the problem. There are 4 questions to consider when determining whether to proceed with a comprehensive assessment or not, according to Hodge 15. How interested the client is in transitioning to a comprehensive assessment? To what extent can I work with the client in a spiritually competent manner? How important is spirituality to the client? To what degree is spirituality related to service provision? Spiritual histories. So there are 2 different types of spiritual histories that a practitioner can conduct. So there's this chronological spiritual history and an anthropological spiritual history. Spiritual histories are a method used to conduct spiritual assessments. Spiritual histories represent an important and foundational approach to spiritual assessment. As individuals move through life, they create a narrative about their existence to explore an individual's spiritual story. There is typically a semi-structured clinical interview that occurs. A chronological spiritual history, there are 3 main questions that guide the conversation in a chronological manner: past, present, and future. These items guide the conversation to help the individual tell their spiritual stories from childhood through present and potentially the future. During this process, the therapist creates a dialogue with the individual that feels relevant to the client while also eliciting information about how spirituality played a role in the individual's past, present, and future. The anthropological spiritual history is used to retain the basic narrative concept that animates the chronological method. However, the anthropological spiritual history provides extra structure to assist the therapist in conducting the assessments. These assessments seek to make implicit assumptions about the nature of humanity, explicit highlighting key domains that may be helpful in administering an assessment. The process begins with an initial narrative framework to provide the practitioner with potential questions to help the individual tell their story. Strengths and limitations. Many individuals thrive on face-to-face interactions. Therefore, for those who are comfortable exploring their spirituality, spiritual histories could resonate with their personality. Spiritual histories may also be a good fit for individuals who come from cultures that value storytelling. They are also very highly client-centered and give the individual the ability to relate their stories without having to adapt their narratives to fit predetermined frameworks. Therefore, individuals are able to share their stories in a more natural manner. There are some limitations, though. Some individuals are not comfortable with exploring their spiritual narratives. For individuals who are more reserved or uncomfortable sharing personal information, it may be counterproductive to try and conduct a spiritual history. It is also possible that a practitioner could offend their client if their level of spiritual competence is limited or marginal. If an individual shares spiritual experience that the practitioner perceives to be unusual or abnormal and involuntarily responds inappropriately, there could be potential damage to the therapeutic relationship. Also, spiritual histories require an investment of time. Therefore, if there's not a lot of time or are limited resources, the time should be better spent exploring other issues and concerns. Thank you.